Welcome to the last session of our four-part webinar journey, which is aimed to provide a basic introduction into some of the key concepts regarding the world of microbiological contamination. My name is Owen Busch, and I have the pleasure to present to you today. Over these next 20 minutes, we will provide insights on the following. We will touch ever so briefly on some main points covered in our prior webinar journey thus far. The advantages of catching contamination early, how the removal of water helps minimize risks, and that rapid testing provides a basis for the most effective intervention and remediation, and how a flexible and fluid testing program can help identify the best times to do maintenance. It's important to understand that there is no one-size-fits-all approach. So we are not going to be dictating or prescribing remedies, but rather providing some pointers on what to look for and some of the techniques which can be used to help reduce costs, minimize the risks of microbiological contamination. We have stressed from the beginning of this journey that water is the main contributing factor to microbiological contamination. So regularly removing as much water as possible by any means will help to minimize the risks that water can generate. Water, the organisms that cause microbiological contamination, and potential other contaminants, such as particulate, are usually found at the bottom of fuel system tanks. With this in mind, future fuel systems ideally should be of a bottom-fed fuel delivery design, with built-in filtration or fuel polishing systems to help reduce water and particulate settlement by agitating the fuel and helping to keep it as clean as possible. The less water and contaminants which are given time to breed or impact fuel systems, the less maintenance will be necessary to remedy, and by extension, the more reliable downstream assets will perform. Prevention is by far the best strategy, much better than scrambling to cure a problem. While removal of water might be the most important method of slowing the growth of any microbiological contamination, fuel testing and ensuring a proper fuel sample is obtained for testing is not far behind that. To touch on the topic of fuel sampling just briefly here, the urgency to conduct a timely microbiological growth test once a sample has been obtained is due to the fact that organisms can change rapidly. So to get the most representative test result you can, testing as soon as possible, and ideally on-site at the tank is optimal and considered best practice. The main reason is the longer it takes for the sample to be tested, the more likely organisms can be changed by either multiplying or, in a worst case scenario, they'll actually die. While having higher test results, that might not be the end of the world, as it would likely lead to some sort of a intervention in fuel treatment. But if the organisms perish and you end up getting a false negative result, that's not necessarily an ideal outcome. You would be operating under the belief that everything is okay and that no action needs to be taken when there could be a problem lurking around the corner. It is also important to re-emphasize that not all organisms are harmful to fuel. So why would you want to act upon something that could have entered the fuel sample through environmental or human factors? There are many, many stray organisms that can enter a fuel sample due to a multitude of reasons, such as someone accidentally sneezing into the sample or a sample left exposed to the elements before being sealed. So minimizing the risk of cross-contamination will help any test method used perform the job it was intended to do. Testing is the most cost-effective first line of defense. So giving it the best chance to give you the most accurate representation of what is really happening in your fuel system can save you a lot of time, effort, and money. When taking a fuel sample, remember the acronym from our first session, PEST. P for preparation. Preparation is key to obtaining a good and most representative fuel sample. E for environment, minimizing external factors that could pose a cross-contamination risk. S for sample. At a minimum, take a sample from the lowest point of the tank, as that is where the highest concentration of water and organisms are likely to be found. T for transport. You may not have heard, but ASTM D6469 recommends that if you are unable to test samples quickly and on site, then the sample should be transported on ice and tested within 24 hours for the most representative result. Although the PEST acronym may be easy to remember, how do we put this all into practice is the question that you're probably asking. Well, in simple terms, when taking a sample, it's important that the sample is taken from the lowest point of the tank, as that's where the water likely is going to be settled and organisms will be concentrated. Sampling equipment should be cleaned thoroughly. If transported offsite, the sample should be packaged on ice to minimize the chance of organisms multiplying or even degrading. Ideally, test any water phase of any sample, as that will have the highest concentration of organisms present. And lastly, test as soon after sampling as possible. This is what a good overall process looks like when you are thinking about sampling and preparing that sample for testing. The earlier you catch microbiological contamination, the more cost-effective it's going to be for your operation. Therefore, it's not uncommon for operators to deploy one or more combinations of tools like changing fuel filters frequently, perhaps even over time increasing the micron levels to reduce the number of filter changes, or regularly adding biocide as a proactive remedy against potential risks, or just simply having the fuel tank assets cleaned on a regular basis. Now, there's no right or wrong approach, but finding the most efficient and effective combination of tools will not only help reduce costs, but will also help increase the asset optimization, reducing potential downtime, and potentially providing greater fuel efficiency and improved emissions. Testing can help reduce the overall cost of maintaining assets in the fight against microbiological contamination by providing a guide as to when and what level of intervention might be necessary. Over the previous few slides, we have indicated the need to ensure the most representative sample possible by avoiding fuel sample cross-contamination and testing as soon after sampling as possible. We have also highlighted that not all organisms are harmful and will degrade the fuel, so why act upon them? And how regular testing can help reduce maintenance costs. All of this is great, but wouldn't it also be ideal to have an easy tool which utilizes antibody technology like that used in the medical industry for such things as rapid COVID testing, and for it to be conducted on site in minutes, not days, which also through a free smartphone app provides a fully traceable data-driven reporting tool that can aid operations to track trends within their assets, providing them the ability to quickly intervene to situations before they become bigger issues. While there is no simple right or wrong answer or a clear mandate that dictates how frequently fuel should be tested, there are a few additional areas to consider to help you find the right approach for your own operation. Humid and wet climates can enable the growth of microbiological contamination, as water can enter the system through environmental factors such as condensation. Testing does not have to be a regimented practice. Actually, it can be quite flexible to help meet any growing concerns you may have about specific assets or locations, but at a minimum, using a testing pattern of twice a year is often advised. As organisms are not spread evenly in any fuel system, if you get a positive result in the first instance, it's recommended to retest to confirm the result to reduce the risk of acting on a potential hotspot. If the result is confirmed in any remedial work undertaking, it's also advised to test again once that work is complete to ensure the intervention has worked. As testing can be completely flexible, if you happen to have had a microbiological incident, which has now been corrected, it may be of interest to the operation to bring testing forward on the next cycle. So from 6 months to say 3 months, for example, to be able to monitor that asset more closely for any signs of further issues before you set it back out again, once you are comfortable that the previous risk has been mitigated. Testing is one thing, but what options are there if you get a positive result? and something really needs to be done. Before proceeding, it's worth highlighting that microbiological contamination can lead to significant unplanned maintenance costs and potential disruptions to operations. We need to ask ourselves, what is the cost of having to potentially downgrade fuel, remove it altogether, dispose of it, and replace with fresh fuel? If I must take an asset out of service, what is the impact to the operation? Is it feasible to take the asset out of service in the first place? Can in-house resources be used to tackle the problem, or are third-party contractors required? And if so, how quickly can they be mobilized and at what cost? Not monitoring microbiological contamination can have serious impacts on safety of life, equipment, and potential environmental impacts from possible corrosion of storage tanks. So can you really take the risk? So you've carried out a fuel test, which gave you a positive result, and a second test has confirmed it. So what comes next? Well, there are a number of options, with the most mainstream currently on the screen. Let us start with the least intrusive on an operational perspective: bore scoping or tank inspection. We previously covered that not all organisms will degrade fuel, so why act upon a result that may have been influenced by outside sources, such as a technician handling a sample with dirty hands, or a fuel sample that was left unsealed and exposed to the environment for any amount of time? Having a look inside the tank for signs of contamination would be a logical and cost-effective place to start, potentially saving money in misdirected and remedial action or unwanted downtime. Looking into the tank will help identify the extent of the problem. If the extent of the problem is not significant, then it could be possible to fuel polish or filter the fuel to take out excess contaminants. In some industries, a kill dose of biocide can also be used to help kill any microbes present, but also help break down contamination which may have adhered itself to the fuel system components. The reality is that a combination of both biocide and fuel filtering or polishing would be required, given the biocide will kill off the organisms, but if the debris is still left in the tank, then further issues can occur, so filtering this all out will help. It is important to highlight two things with the potential use of biocides. First, when using a biocide, the fuel level in the tank at the time of the treatment is something to consider. What if the contamination is spread up the tank walls and is above the fuel line when administered? The treatment will not be able to work to its full extent. So as soon as you fill the tank up again, the problem will start again. Second, regular use of the same biocide can create an environment where the organisms may become immune to the treatment as they evolve to the environment, in a similar way to the differing strains of COVID have been doing. So changing it up every now and then or reducing its usage frequency is not a bad thing. Finally, in the most extreme cases, you may not be able to avoid tank cleaning, including the potential additional costs of disposing of the fuel within the tank. Tank cleaning also necessitates putting the assets out of service for a period of time, and this can have significant impact on operations. So it's best to avoid unplanned tank cleaning as much as possible. Prevention is far better than chasing a cure. Reducing the chance of contamination becoming an issue in the first place is highly beneficial and the best course of action. But remember, microbiological contamination can occur naturally through no fault of any party. It can be transferred from one asset to another as the fuel moves through the supply chain. As water is a key component in enabling microbiological contamination, removing as much of it from the system as possible is vital. In some fuel systems, this can be done through pre-installed drain points or water separation filters. Alternatively, other means may be necessary, but the most effective way is to keep the fuel circulating to reduce the risk of water settling. This is where fuel polishing systems can help to both filter out certain contaminants and reduce water settlement by agitating the fuel and keeping it circulated. This can be undertaken by permanently attaching equipment to the storage tanks or using additional equipment ranging from a small mobile base to fuel trucks designed for that very purpose. In some industries, it is also possible to add certain stabilizers or additives to the fuel, which may help minimize the risk. But irrespective of all these options, there will still need to be a need for testing to be undertaken to provide confirmation, traceability of asset health, and for those results to be fed into any asset monitoring system you may have so maintenance can be planned accordingly. Finally, future-proofing fuel systems can focus on conical shape, bottom-fed fuel delivery to reduce the presence of water and particulate on a more consistent basis. Earlier, we raised the notion that in an ideal world, there would be a fuel test tool that could be performed on-site, helping to reduce the need for transporting samples to off-site locations where testing times cannot be guaranteed. This testing tool would also be simple, providing results within minutes while targeting only those organisms that are known to degrade fuel and not detect all organisms. One that would also have a data-driven functionality to help with instant reporting, to aid trend analysis and swifter remedial action when required. Thankfully, that ideal option exists today with the use of the FUELSTAT test kit and free FUELSTAT results app. The FUELSTAT test kit uses that antibody technology, like that used in the medical industry to rapidly diagnose such things as COVID, for instance, thus helping to provide a basis for more defined testing of microbiological contamination. Furthermore, FUELSTAT can be used 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year, ensuring that you can benefit from utilizing the freshest fuel sample possible, wherever you happen to be in the world and at any time. All right, as I mentioned, there really is no one-size-fits-all approach to fuel testing. There are no legislative mandates for the testing and treatment of fuel, and many industry protocols vary. For instance, large parts of the aviation fuel supply chain cannot even use biocides. So the basis upon which any organization builds a prevention process rests on each operation's individual conditions. However, any process should consider the PEST elements of preparation, environment, sample, and transport to ensure that the fuel sample is the best that it can be, helping to maximize the chances of obtaining the most representative result from any testing process. Speed of testing is vital, but the most important factor is the removal of as much water as possible from the fuel system to minimize both the risk of microbiological contamination and the cost of fixing the problem. The establishment of a repeatable program for the monitoring and prevention of contamination will help your operation save money and reduce downtime of assets by minimizing unplanned maintenance caused by the damage these pests can create when left undetected. Let's take a moment to summarize some key takeaways from today's session. The presence of water should be minimized as much as possible. The preparation of a fuel sample and testing it quickly is key in providing the best foundation for any test process in order for that test to do its job effectively. Good fuel husbandry will save you money by reducing unplanned maintenance costs. Testing at the earliest stage is the most cost-effective first line of defense in the fight against microbiological contamination. Analyzing trends enables swifter action and asset control. We hope you have enjoyed this informative journey and found it helpful in understanding some principles of microbiological contamination and what can be done to protect your assets properly. So this was the first of a 4-part webinar series. So if you enjoyed it, please join us for the rest of the sessions. And in the meantime, I just want to thank you for your time today and from all of us here at Conidia